Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the show. Today, I'm absolutely delighted to have with me Bill Inmon. He's a name that you may recognize. Hopefully, a lot of you do. Bill is a long-standing industry expert in the field of data warehousing. And of course, many recognize him as the father of the data warehouse. An American computer scientist by trade, now doing lots of things in data, in analytics, and particularly around text and text analytics, which we'll come to. So, Bill, I just wanted to start by welcoming you to the show. Thanks for coming along.
Thank you, Jason. It's a pleasure to be here.
No worries. And I've spent 20 or so years in the data industry, and lots of that time has been mentioning your name. So it's absolute pleasure to have you on the show. Of course, I've been debating Inman versus Kimball for a lot of my career. We're not going to get into that today. I'm sure you've done that topic to death. But it certainly has been a sort of a running theme through my early data career anyway. But yeah, absolutely pleasure to have you on the show, and looking forward to the conversation. So I'm sure there are lots of people that do know who you are, but just for those that don't, and to refresh those that do, just want to give some background about you, a little bit about where you've come from in this space and what you're up to now.
Surely, I'm in Denver, Colorado. I have a small company called Forest Stream Technology. What I've been working on is the problem of using text in decision making. Corporations around the world have huge amounts of text that never gets used in the process of decision making, and that's number one, a great waste of opportunity. It's
Mm.
also number two, a challenge. So I've spent the last 20 years of my life working on the problem of why don't we use text in decision making, and what can we do about it?
Okay, amazing. Well, I look forward to digging into that topic with you. You say you spent 20 years doing that, and I know that obviously not all data is text, and some of it is a little bit more structured than that. Have you always had a kind of like drive towards using this slightly more human and real data, shall we say, in terms of text and what people say and write down? Or have you kind of moved to that more recently and switched your attention to that more recently?
Well, what do you mean by more recent? Because I've been working on it about 20 years.
Okay.
And that certainly isn't recent, but the challenge of text is a very fundamental challenge because first off, first off, in terms of speaking language, reading language, understanding anything, that's all done through text. So text is the
Mm,
lowest common denominator for pretty much anything we do from one human to the next.
yeah.
And what's really interesting to me, or one of the things that's really interesting to me, is the fact that in order for anybody to read or speak, you've got to learn an enormous set of rules that are tucked into your brain. Now,
Mm,
these rules you learn when you're 1 and 2 years old, when you're first a child learning to speak, but you typically you first learn the alphabet, then you learn words, then you learn sounds, then you learn spelling, then you learn sentence construction, then you learn uh, 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 all sorts of things. And what's interesting is as we are speaking right now, our brains are subconsciously processing this enormous amount of rules. And so, but we all take it for granted. We say, "Oh, I'm listening to that guy, or I'm
mm.
reading the book, or I'm doing something." We don't we have no appreciation for the fact of all of the rules that are required to handle text. But when you go to a computer in as many ways is like a small child. A computer has got to learn not all, many of these rules in order to make sense of it. And so, but again, because people speak it every day, they have no appreciation for the complexity that underlies text.
Mm. It's interesting, actually. Obviously, what we learn, as you say, we learn. Most people learn to speak early on, and then it becomes ingrained, it becomes innate, it becomes part of just the fabric of the brain, and it becomes very natural, like it's happening to us. But of course, then there's different languages, so actually, then you sort of revert back to that. When you learn a new language, you start to learn some new rules, some new patterns, some new constructs of words and text, and how they fit together in a different order, in a different structure than your base native language that you've learned. So through just talking and speaking, I think that does sort of come to the fore when you're going through your education system, or when you choose to use learn a new language or go to a new country.
But what we've talked about is only the tip of the iceberg in terms of complexity, because once you get into language, you run into things like synonyms,
Mm,
antonyms, and as a quick example, when I say the word fire, what do I mean? Do I mean your building is burning? I could mean that. Do I mean that your boss has walked in and said you're fired? I could mean that. Do I mean that you have a gun in your hand and you pulled the trigger and you fired it? I could mean that. And the word fire is just one of many, many words that
mm,
has multiple meanings, which are very different from each other. The different meanings of fire are actually not even terribly related to each other,
mm.
or maybe they are. But when you are starting to read and interpret text, the and there are other tricky parts to text as well. You probably don't want to get me started on talking about the tricky parts of text, because we could be here for a week talking about them. But that's what's entailed
Yeah.
by taking raw text and needing to take that raw text and turn it into something useful.
It's interesting, isn't it? As you say, learning languages and all those complexities and the context needed to know which fire you mean, or which fire to use.
Yeah.
It's the context that's important. And as you say, you take it for granted once you've learned to speak that you can speak. But then other things that are actually much more straightforward to learn, people struggle with. There are you know there are skills to be gained that people just struggle to learn, but they're far more straightforward than this challenge, this complexity of, as you say, all these different things to learn when you're learning to speak.
And that's why it took 20 years to figure all of this out.
Well, hopefully you've got a book out on this, Bill. I'm sure you do.
Yes, I actually have several books on it. One book is turning text into gold. It's not really. It doesn't get into the theory of what needs to be done, but it shows what can be done. It
Right.
shows that you can take conversations, you can take written word and whatever, and you can turn it in. And once you do that, then all kinds of doors open up. I think the most significant door that I think is the most significant is medical records. That
Mm,
medical records are written in the form of text, and that's good for a doctor. That's good for a patient. But what it's not good for is for research, because it's one thing to look at an individual as a patient and try to help him. It's another thing to look at 100,000 individuals.
mm,
And in this day and age of pandemics, we desperately need to be able to look at 1 million people or 100,000 people all at once. And you can't do that as long as the medical records are written in the form of text. So
yeah.
one of the things that is that I'm proudest of, pardon me, is the ability to read the text in medical records, turn that text into a database, and then allow a researcher to now, once we've gotten through the barrier of text, we can look at 100,000 patients at the same time.
Mm,
But
yeah.
that's just one example of many of the valid uses of. I mean, if you really want me to, I can tell you some really interesting stories. But of the one that I'm the most proud of, and and why am I proud of it? I'm proud of it because we at least indirectly can affect people's health. We
Mm,
can be a positive influence on making the world a healthier place. And if that doesn't get you up in the morning, I don't know what does.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's got to be worthwhile, right? You've got to have a purpose to all this stuff, and yeah, what better than to support and help people's health and well being. I mean, it's interesting, isn't it, though? Because the take text, turn that into structure and database, and then analyze it at volume. That's and learn something from it and research it. Of course, some people might look at this and go, well, why don't we why don't we change the input? Why don't we put this in a form? Why don't we put it in structure to start with, rather than trying to create some structure out of the sort of the mess that could be written down, and the words that could be written down, as you say, are very complicated. But that in its own right has a different bunch of challenges, right?
Oh, it would be like the conversation we're having right now. Jason, I can only talk with you in checkbox A, B, C, and D.
Yeah,
What if I want to say something that isn't in A, B, C, and D? I want to say something different. But if all you give me is a choice of boxes A, B, C, and D, we're going to have a strange conversation
yeah,
because normal conversation like we're having now is free form.
yeah,
You can ask any question you want. I can give you any answer I want there. But once you start to say, okay, you are now restricted in what kind of communication you make, then you take a lot of the value of communication away.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, you see that. It's kind of where my head went with the sort of the posing that thought, was that that's kind of what happens with lots of chatbots when you're contacting your bank and they give you a chatbot to talk to. It's a very stage structured, not really a discussion at all. It's more just it's a search and it's a response. So it is that kind of like very stunted, lack of creative kind of conversation where it only works if you're going through a certain specific path.
That's correct. And the same with phone conversations. You get these prefabricated phone conversations, and the operator asks you, what's your name, what's your social security number, what's the amount you want to transact, and as long as you're in those boundaries, and it's okay.
Yeah.
But then you say, wait a minute, I have somebody trying to break into my bank account, and the you've got to talk to a human being for some of those things.
Yeah. It does this mean that working with text, understanding text is really about language? Yes, we mentioned that, but language, psychology, human interaction, behavior, creativity. Is that what understanding and using text is all about? Or is that the challenge of using text, is those things?
I hate the answer I'm about to give you, except that it's the truth.
Okay.
The answer is yes and no.
Okay.
And I mean, there are parts of what you've said are absolutely correct. Human behavior, understanding emotion, things like that. Yes, that's part. On the other hand, if you say all this is about is studying text, it's one thing to study text. It's another thing to actually commercialize and use it. Those
Mm,
are two related but different topics.
mm,
And so in answer to your question, yes, this is all about studying text, but you can study text till the world looks level and still not have anything valid come out of it. You've
mm.
still got to be able to take all of those factors. And let me give you one quick little example of text that, in many regards, in many, number one, the most important thing we say is what we say. On the other hand, the way we say it has also got to be factored in.
Yeah.
Let's take in something really simple. I love you. So if I say I love you, means that I love you. I love you. It means I don't like you. I don't hate you. I love you. Or I love you. It's not her or him or whatever. It's you. So it's not just the words that you're talking about. It's also the way that you say them,
Yeah.
and that too gives context.
Mm.
So I hope you can see now why this is such a complex subject.
Yeah, it is, in some ways, that's no different to getting insight from numbers and figures and facts. you need to know the context of those numbers and figures and facts. You need to know what they're trying to tell you. You need to know the perception of the person that's reading them. All of that comes into play. So once we know what it is we're looking at, we need to understand where it's come from. We need to understand the context. We need to understand what kind of decision we want to make, because otherwise you can interpret all these things differently.
That reminds me of a funny story that I once heard. In the early days of space exploration, in a place called Jet Propulsion Laboratory in California, these scientists gathered all of this rocket data. They'd shoot a rocket in the air, and they'd see how fast it could go and how fast it could fly, all that kind of stuff. And
Right.
so they stored all of these numbers. But what they forgot to store is the metadata. So years later, when they went back to look at the data, they had this big library of 1, 2, 10, 15, 20, 35. What does it mean? Who knows what it
Ah,
means? And so the numbers without the metadata, I'm not going to say are meaningless, but they're pretty close to being
yeah.
meaningless.
Yeah. You don't know. You don't know what they mean. You don't know their context.
Yeah,
You don't know what it's trying to tell you.
yeah.
So, likewise, then is text on its own without if I kind of class text as unstructured and language, and then numbers and figures and facts as in things that are much more easy to read straight out the box, do you normally need some facts and figures and numbers structured in order to kind of help understand the text? And what I mean by that is, I've done some work in retail, and what was really important is not only what people do, what they clicked on, what they bought, what they sent back, what
Mm.
they returned, the sizes that they ordered, all those sorts of things. But what was also interesting was their behavior, how they shopped. So whether they went online, whether they went into store, how they moved around, what they looked at, what they touched, what they clicked. And then there was the kind of the inferences you can make from those things. But then there was also what they said. So on social media, in feedback forms, in complaints letters, and it was all those things in context of each other that helped us to make a real understanding of the customers and what they really mean, because what they say and what they do could be different.
Oh, absolutely. Now, let me tell you, underlying your conversation is something that's fundamental that we do that we don't even think about, but it's there. And that is, in order to understand and do anything with the computer, you've got to have context.
Hmm.
Now, context with numbers is fairly straightforward. Why? Because when we are defining a database, we say, okay, this is a database attribute. This means the amount of the sale, or whatever it means.
Yeah.
So when we go look at those numbers, we have the context right there waiting for us, nice and easy, because it's part of the process of doing that kind of processing. However, when it comes to text, we do have context in text, but it's not presented the same way at all. You've got to, when you read raw text, not only do you have to know what text you want to look at, you've also got to know that you need to look at context and how to find context.
Hmm.
Now, 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 I can tell you definitively, having spent 20 years of my life doing this, that 90% of the intellectual battle is in context, not text. There is some interesting challenges with text, but determining how you find context in raw text is an art form unto itself.
Hmm.
The closest I can give to you an example is imagine yourself as the conductor of a symphony orchestra, and in your orchestra you've got violins, you've got a piano, you've got drums, you've got cello, you've got a lot of things out there, and you as the orchestrator have got the wand in your hand, and you wave the wand around and say, okay, violins, now we want it louder and faster, and okay, drum, it's your turn. Uh, uh, Doing context is the same way, because I get asked all the time, gee, Bill, what is the algorithm for finding context in raw text? And
Hmm.
the answer is there is no algorithm.
Hmm.
There are multiple algorithms, and when you go to read and understand context in text, you've got to be like the orchestra conductor. You're saying, okay, for this type of text, for this type of thing, here's how we understand context.
Hmm.
Now, two words later, for these words, and this is how we have to interpret context. The real trick, why it's taken 20 years to do all this, the real trick is in understanding. Is everybody's looking for the magic algorithm, and I have news for you: there ain't no magic algorithm. There is a whole series of algorithms that, working collectively together,
Yeah.
do give you the capability of understanding context. But 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 it takes a lot of work, a lot
Mm.
of innovation to find out what each one of those algorithms are.
The thing that I've seen most recently that seems to do an okay job at this, I context of words, is Chat GPT from OpenAI, and obviously there's a lot of talk about this at the moment. But that, if you ask that a very sort of straight black and white question, it will give you an answer. But then when you apply context, now give it to me in the style of this, or now assume I'm a 3-year-old, or you embellish your question with some context that helps Chat GPT understand you and what you're doing and where you're coming from. It does seem to give quite a contextual based response rather than the black and white response that you may have first got. I don't know if you've had a chance to play around with that, but that does seem to be getting close to properly understanding context.
I've personally not had a chance to look at and play with that technology, and I've heard good things about it, and I'm sure it's going to be an addition to our society.
Yeah. Great. Well, the other thing that sort of came to my mind, I've never really spotted this before, and it's probably me being dumb, is the word text and context, and both have the word text in, and con means without or against or disagreement. So context is the disagreement of text.
Well, the Romans didn't get it right 2,000 years ago.
There we go. They need new words. Who would have thought?
That's right.
So let's talk about sort of some like this practically then. I've had some experience of working with text, even 10 years ago, and lots of people have been working on text, and you've been doing it for a lot longer, of course. So it's not necessarily a new thing. So have people really been doing this? Have people really been making progress? And when I say people, I mean organizations, like you talked about hospital examples, but corporates, public sector, hospitals, all sorts of places. Have organizations really been doing this? And what kind of mistakes or positive outcomes have you seen?
Well, you asked the question, so I'll give you the answer. I don't like saying negative things, but yes, the whole notion of being able to handle text has been around for a long time. I remember when I was going to graduate school many years ago, in which we were stuck in something called NLP,
Mm,
natural
yeah,
language processing,
yeah.
and
Where,
and
where,
so
where, where what college was that, Bill?
well, my undergraduate was at Yale University. My graduate school was at New Mexico State University.
Okay.
And we were studying NLP, the way to handle text. NLP is technology and a discipline of thought that's great for studying text.
Right.
If we but it is not. It wasn't then, and it's not today a commercialized product.
Mm,
Trying to use NLP in a commercial sense, and I'd rather not go into the limitations of NLP, but trying to use NLP in a commercial sense uh, is not good. If you want to study language, NLP is great for that. If
right.
you want to turn language into a usable form for analytical processing, we really don't recommend NLP for that.
Okay.
And yet the academics of the world, the a lot of the vendors of the world have thought that NLP is the way to go. And again, if what you want to do is study language, then NLP is great for that. But if what you want to do is to take bodies of text and turn them into something useful, NLP has been a failure at that, and is going to
Right.
likely to continue to be a failure.
Interesting, because I understood it to be almost a stepping stone to getting value. So it's sort of the thing that helps you to, as you say, study it. But from studying it, you then need to make some some decisions based on it, or build the context as we just talked about, so that you can then get some good value from it. Is that not the case?
It's a stepping stone, but it's a stepping stone off a cliff. Let,
Right.
let, let me give you a couple of examples, or at least one good example.
Okay.
Something called IBM Watson was based, among other things, on NLP,
Mm,
and IBM spent years. It's estimated, the numbers I've read, that IBM spent $2.5 billion on trying to make Watson and NLP a commercial viable product. I don't know. I mean, how many years? Probably 10 years of effort, $2.5 billion. Just the other day, IBM sold Watson because it didn't work.
mm,
And if you want to see more proof of that, look up MD Anderson Cancer Clinic and Watson on the internet, and you will find out that there is a lawsuit between those two organizations
mm.
for IBM having misled and taken money from MD Anderson. So, and
Right.
again, I'm not making this up. Just look on the internet, and you will see the truth of that. So,
Yeah.
if IBM can't make NLP work as a stepping stone,
Hmm.
that's why I say you step off the cliff. You don't step under the next stone. You step into infinity.
Got it. Got it. Wow. Okay. So if it's not NLP, then so what? So that's sort of one of the mistakes, I guess, was the point there, that people have tried to implement NLP technology in order to help understand and get value from text. Um, is there sort of practical use cases where, not necessarily NLP, but text in its own right? You talked about you know doctors' records and health records, but is there some other great examples that you've seen and worked with around practical use cases for text?
Oh yeah. Let me. This
You have to
takes
dig
a
into
little
your
bit.
library, and chuck us a
And
few.
and do I have a library? Now, this is going to take me a little bit of time to set the stage for it, but you'll understand at the end. Corporation after corporation has got huge number of documents. For example, an oil company. It is estimated in an oil company that there may be as 20 to 30,000 documents per oil well, and a big oil company will have lots and lots of wells that are out there.
Mm,
Now, so what it means is when you're sitting there at a large organization like an oil company, and you have a need for finding information, you have a problem. It's like going to your public library looking for a book by walking in the front door and start to feel your way through the stacks. You've got
right.
floors and floors of books and stacks of books. And so you're going to spend a long time being looking for your document. In fact, you're going to spend so much time. Well, that in and of itself. How much time you're going to spend? Lots of time, a lot of it wasted, and furthermore, you may never find the document that you want. So what you can do with text analytics is you can create a card catalog, because when you go into the library, you don't go look through the stacks. You go to the card catalog, and you let your brain and your fingers walk through the card catalog. You find what you want, and now you can efficiently and quickly find the book that you're looking for in the
Mm,
library.
yeah.
Well, corporations like oil companies are the same way. They've got all of these huge collection of documents that are out there, and they can't find them. So what you do is you create a card catalog for the oil company or large organization, so that now when somebody is looking for information, they can find it with ease and dispatch. The biggest friend in the world ought to be the data scientist. Data
Mm,
scientists ought to love this idea of being able to quickly and easily find information. So
mm,
you want a real live case of uses of text. Nothing else. There's, by the way, there's a lot of other things I could talk about, but the simplest and most powerful case and most generic case I can think about is the fact that corporations have insurance companies. Think how many documents an insurance
mm,
company has, and and can they lay their hands on on any given document, any given one time, boy, they've got this horrific problem of
Mm,
needing to go search through all those information. What they
yeah.
need is a card catalog.
Mm. Same with law firms, I guess, as well, with case history.
Yes. Well, law firms, case history, contracts management,
Mm,
wherever there's documents. And do corporations have documents? I
yeah.
believe it's
Boy, they
safe to
do.
say every
Yeah.
corporation in the world has documents.
Yeah, for sure. And beyond documents, then, because the use case the way I always think about, certainly the data set I always think about when it comes to text, and thinking back to the complexity we talked about is social media, is social data. Partly because there's so much of it, but also the complexity because the language people use and the colloquialisms and the hard to pick up sarcasm and all these kind of things. Is social media a big deal, as big a deal as you think it should and could be, certainly for consumer focused businesses?
Oh dear. Okay, you've asked a question, and if you've asked the question, I'm going to tell you the answer. But I'm also going to pardon me. I'm also going to tell you you're not going to like the answer I give you. But
Okay,
but excuse me one second.
no problem.
Uh, I hope I can talk again. I had this most interesting conversation with a professor at a large American university. This professor was a professor of customer experience, and so I had written a book called "Hearing the Voice of the Customer," with the intention of going out to social media and pointing out to people that there's a lot of really interesting information on social media. And I was connected with this professor, and he said, Bill, he says, I've been a professor at this university for a long time now, and we've done study after study. And what we can tell you definitively is that 60% of corporations in America have no idea who their customer is, what they're saying, or even want to know. He says
Right.
30% of the corporations say they want to understand their customer, but they don't do anything. He
Mm,
says roughly 10% of corporations actually want to listen to what their customers are saying with social media.
right.
Now, I have a story for you that if you want me to tell it, I will, but it's of an incident that happened to us.
Love
We,
to hear it.
okay, a while back, a friend of ours was a consultant at Nike Corporation, the shoemaker.
Okay.
And she called me on the phone one day and she said, Bill, Nike has a problem. They are losing market share to Adidas and don't know why. Can you help us? I said, sure, we'd be happy to help. And so what we did was we went out to the internet and we grabbed about 5,000 comments from Nike customers and 5,000 comments from Adidas customers, which, by the way, on the internet is quite easy to do. So we got these comments made by people, put out into a public domain. We still have them in case you're interested. And so we started to analyze them. And as far as I can tell, Adidas is a normal, well run company. But when we got to Nike, something really interesting happened. We started reading the Nike comments, and fully, I don't know, 20, 25, 30% of the comments said, went like this. I bought my Nike shoe. Within 3 weeks' time, the Nike shoe disintegrated, and now Nike won't replace my shoe. I'll never buy another Nike again. And it didn't take our software. If anybody would have gone out to social media and read it, all you had to do is sit there and read them. And again, in case anybody's interested, I captured those things and I still have them. So we wrote a report up. We put them through our software, and sure enough, it showed that Nike was having a problem with their shoe. We sent it to Nike Marketing Management, and Nike Marketing Management took one look at it and said, "Oh my gosh, this is embarrassing. We can't let anybody see this information." So I said, "Okay." So we wrote then the president of Nike, a guy at the time called Mark Parker. It was not a snarky note at all. It was, Dear Mr. Parker, we're an independent party. We've analyzed information. We found it on the internet. We think that your customers need to know this information. About 3 weeks later, I got a letter back from the president of Nike saying, "Dear Mr. Inman, Nike listens to certain consultants. You're not one of them. We don't want to hear from you again."
Wow.
And so I thought, okay. But about 9 months later, there was a famous basketball game played in the United States between Duke and North Carolina. It was the largest attended basketball game on television in history. Even the president of the United States attended that game in person.
Right.
So it was a big deal. And in the first 60 seconds of the game, the Duke star running down the court with his Nike shoes on had his Nike shoe explode, and on TV the shoe disintegrated, and the star Zion Williamson hasn't really recovered to this date. He was damaged that bad, and Duke
Wow.
lost the game. And so they're in front of the biggest television audience for basketball, college basketball in history. Nike's shoe exploded. By the way, I'm not making any of this up. You're welcome to research this on anything that you want to research for. And in the next 2 days, Nike stock fell by $2.5 billion. So
Wow.
that's the impact of not listening to what your customer's saying, because long before the Duke North Carolina game had ever occurred, Nike could have gone out to social media and read what people were saying, and it's right there in front of you. It turned out that I'm not an expert in manufacturing shoes or anything like that, but through some friends of mine, we found out that Nike had been changed the glue on their shoe, that the glue
Right.
on their shoe that connects the shoe to the pad of the sole of the shoe had been changed, and somehow there was a defect in that, and that's
Right.
what was happening. So it was all out there
Fascinating.
on social media, but but Nike was just one example of a company that had pay no attention to what's on social media, ignore those people. Well, let me tell you something. If you want to set your company's stock back $2.5 billion,
Mm.
be my guest.
Yeah. Well, it's brilliant story. And yeah, as you say, impact lives. Basketball players impacted the business and the share price and brand reputation, right? So it can have a big impact. I mean, I do, obviously there's something about text there. There's also something about kind of just listening to the customer and choosing to listen to the customer. Text is a good way of listening to the customer, but there are many other ways, and also just good old fashioned customer service, and not ignoring sort of complaints, problems that people are flagging to you.
But even when certainly customer service, I'm a big fan of customer service, but customer service is one-on-one, one person on one
Mm.
person.
Mm.
What you don't get with customer service is what are 1,000 customers saying,
Yeah. Yeah.
and that's the value. That's the value in handling text, is you
Mm.
can now listen to 1,000 people rather than one person.
Yeah. Yeah, well, of course, yeah, value of data, and text there as well. So just sort of thinking about wrapping up, I kind of feel, we should talk about where does this go next. So you should definitely check out Chat GPT, because I think you'll find that fascinating. But where does text go next? Is it kind of the technology exists, now it's time to apply it? Is it no, there's still a long way to go, both from a research point of view, back to the kind of understanding human brain and patterns and behavior and all the things we talked about in terms of the human condition? Or is it just, as I say, just we just need to get on with it, and organizations need to get behind it and just execute on it now?
Well, pardon me. That too is an interesting question. When we first started this, we thought that the technicians of the world would like what we do, and for a variety of reasons, technicians of the world hate to get involved with text, and there are a lot of reasons for it. So what we found is when we talk to people, we don't talk to technicians, because
Mm.
technicians want to try to do a lot of things go wrong when you talk to technicians. Instead, the business person, you talk to doctors. Doctors understand the need for looking at
Yeah.
100,000 patients. You
Mm.
talk to you talk to the manager that wants to make money, and say, "Gee, it's my job to grow my business and make money. How do I do that?" You can show an organization how to do that,
Yeah.
and so what we found is that the technicians of the world are one of the most negative factors there is in terms of moving text forward. It's the business person that wants to move text forward.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's yeah, that's a it's a good way to finish, because I think that's true for all data, and find the money or the prize or the value or the purpose, and work back to data and the data sets and the technology that you need for it. So I'm a big advocate of that as well, Bill. So look, but I really appreciate you coming onto the show. It's been fascinating talking to you. I opened up some great stories that I hadn't heard of before, and some great ways of thinking about tech. So I massively appreciate you coming onto the show and talking to us about that.
Thank you, Jason. A real pleasure to be here today.
Brilliant, and I hope you all enjoyed that, everybody listening, and we'll catch you again soon.